Chinese international students generally fall into two categories: the wealthy second generation of Chinese Communist Party leaders and children from middle-class families. The lifestyle of the wealthy second-generation students abroad is incredibly lavish, even astonishing the local aristocracy. A documentary depicts the lives of these wealthy Chinese students. A man in the film says,
"These wealthy students never need reservations at restaurants, always sit in the front row for shows and games, and are recognized everywhere. If you order a $10,000 bottle of wine, they will at least order one for $15,000. In nightclubs, they throw around large amounts of cash like it's nothing, and their everyday entertainment is beyond what most people could ever imagine."
These children from wealthy Chinese families live extravagant lives abroad, residing in mansions, driving luxury cars, and never attending classes. For middle-class students studying abroad, the situation is much harsher. The 3 years of the pandemic and the zero-COVID policy have dealt a devastating blow to China's economy. Even after lifting the restrictions, there have been no signs of recovery. Instead, the situation has worsened. The sluggish domestic demand and the real estate crisis directly impact many small businesses' survival and the incomes of the middle class. This has put financial pressure on many middle-class students studying overseas, with some no longer able to rely on their parents to cover tuition and living expenses.
Recently, a term called study abroad funding cutoff has been trending, with increasing search volume. Now when you search for international students on social media, half the content is about lavish lifestyles, while the other half is about students wondering what to do as their parents face bankruptcy. According to a report by the Times Higher Education, more than 20% of students at top UK universities were in debt crises in 2023, with over 20,000 facing the risk of dropping out. Data from a US education website shows that 17% of freshmen plan to drop out at the end of the semester, and another 19% are unsure if they can return in the fall. Sanlian Life Week previously published an article titled "Study Abroad Funding Cutoff: When Middle-Class Families Suddenly Fall," citing the accounts of several students affected by funding cuts. So, why has this issue become so prominent recently?
This blogger believes that there are two main reasons. First, the historic interest rate hikes and inflation by the Federal Reserve have significantly increased the cost of studying abroad. Tuition fees in the US and the UK, the top choices for Chinese students, have been rising yearly. According to the US News annual survey report, from 2003 to 2023, the average tuition and fees at private U.S. universities increased by 144% and at public universities by 170%. In the 2022-2023 academic year alone, the average tuition and fees at private U.S. universities rose by about 4%, and tuition is just a small part of the expense. Rents, which often rise by 30%, are a huge expenditure. Furthermore, this once-in-40 years inflation has caused a comprehensive increase in food, transportation, insurance, textbooks, and airfare costs, and the exchange rate for the US dollar has risen from a low of 6.2 to 7.3, adding another 15% to the overall cost of studying abroad. The blogger also points out that another major reason for the surge in students experiencing funding cutoffs is the bankruptcy of China's middle class. He believes that the wealth of the Chinese middle class is largely inflated. They do not control the means of production, but merely have a decent income. The pandemic burst the economic bubble, causing many to lose their jobs. The core assets that they were proud of, such as properties in prime cities, have turned into high liabilities as the real estate market shifted. With 77% of Chinese family wealth tied up in real estate, the impact is severe. These struggling middle-class families can no longer afford the high costs of their children's education abroad. Many students can no longer pay tuition, afford rent, or sustain their living expenses. They are unsure about their future. Should they continue studying despite having no money, or find a job which is challenging? Many of these students have been pampered since childhood and lack the skills to live independently in a foreign country. Their only option is to drop out and return home, but transferring to a domestic university is not possible, meaning they would have to start over. The money already invested in their education abroad is wasted. Many of these students facing funding cutoffs are uncertain about their future. Since last year, The hashtag Study Abroad Funding Cutoff has garnered 4.62 million views on Chinese social media platform Xiaohongshu. Many people are seeking help online, asking for advice on how to cope. Some even consult with study abroad program platforms. On a platform named Liangge Study Abroad Program Joint Sino-Foreign Session, a girl called to ask for advice about her boyfriend, who had just completed his first year at an American university when his family went bankrupt. My boyfriend's family went bankrupt. He's studying in the United States and just finished his freshman year at a good school, but he doesn't have a Chinese high school diploma, so if he returns home now, he can't continue his studies.
Let's put it this way. Your boyfriend isn't the first one. I've seen at least 10 students this year alone whose families have gone bankrupt and can no longer support their studies abroad. Did he also attend high school in the US?
So now his family wants to send him to the UK or Australia, but they can only scrape together a budget of 1 million yuan. The rest would have to be borrowed. I want to know if he can continue his undergraduate studies in China.
Let's be realistic. If your family is bankrupt, who would lend you that kind of money, especially tens of thousands a year? People lend money based on the expectation that you can pay it back. I think he should consider a joint Sino-Foreign program to save money. It costs around 100,000 yuan a year, which is more affordable.
Of course, some students choose to work part-time to cover their expenses and complete their studies. According to CNBC, Xiao Zhang, a Chinese student studying design at a university in Alabama, was one semester away from graduation when her parents informed her that they were facing cash flow problems and could no longer support her financially. At that time, Xiao Zhang only had enough money to cover 3 months' rent and could not afford a semester's tuition. Xiao Zhang said her father had invested in the pharmaceutical industry during the COVID-19 pandemic, but suffered significant losses. Her father offered to buy her a ticket to return home, but Xiao Zhang didn't want to interrupt her nearly completed studies. She began looking for part-time jobs, such as babysitting or campus work, but it wasn't easy. A month later, she found a temporary job in another state. She started working at 7 a.m. every day for 3 months. She said, "During that time, I was exhausted and had no time to study, but at least I earned enough to pay for the next semester." Bloomberg also interviewed several Chinese students who shared similar stories of their parents' financial difficulties in China, making it hard to afford the high costs of studying abroad. For nearly 20 years, Chinese students have been the largest group of international students in the U.S. However, over the past 3 years, their numbers have declined, and India is poised to overtake China as the top source of international students. After the pandemic, the number of Chinese students going to the U.S. continued to decline by 0.2%, while the number of Indian students increased significantly by 35%. According to the latest Open Doors report 2023, the number of international students in the U.S. reached over 1 million in 2023, an 11.7% increase, the highest growth in nearly 40 years. However, the number of students from mainland China continued to decline by 0.2% to nearly 290,000, with their share dropping to 27.4%. Although Chinese students still constitute the largest group of international students in the U.S., their lead over Indian students has narrowed to just 2 percentage points. In 2023, the number of Indian students in the U.S. reached almost 270,000, a 35% increase from the previous year. In 2022, India had already seen an 18.9% increase, while the number of Chinese students decreased by 8.6%. Meanwhile, ETS released recent GRE data. From July 2022 to June 2023, there were nearly 58,000 Chinese test takers, an increase of 13.8%, or about 7,000 from the previous year. However, the number of Indian test takers was 113,000, nearly twice that of Chinese test takers. There were 70,000 Chinese test takers, 10,000 more than Indian test takers. Over the past 2 years, the number of Indian test takers has doubled, far surpassing that of Chinese test takers. Apart from the collapse of the middle class affecting the number of students going to the U.S., the Chinese Communist Party, CCP's, negative propaganda has also made parents more cautious about sending their children to America out of safety concerns. China is one of the few countries in the world that does not allow open access to the internet. Ordinary Chinese citizens cannot learn about the outside world through the web. Their perception of right and wrong is entirely dictated by the CCP's propaganda machine. The CCP frequently portrays the U.S. as a dangerous country plagued by rampant crime. Many Chinese people are also increasingly worried about reports of visa denials or interrogations upon entry into the U.S. On the other hand, the CCP's intensification of xenophobic sentiments in China has led to growing negative perceptions of Chinese people among Americans. Due to the continuous emergence of espionage cases and intellectual property theft, more than half of Americans, according to some polls, support restricting Chinese students from coming to the U.S. This trend is not only evident in the U.S., similar patterns are seen in almost all Western countries, where the number of Chinese students is either declining or growing sluggishly. The CCP officially claims that this is because the U.S., leading other Western developed countries, is attempting to contain China and prevent its development by blocking Chinese people from learning advanced technologies. The CCP uses this narrative to cover up the truth about China's sluggish economy, the impoverishment of its middle class, and the cancellation of study abroad plans by many families, leading to an overall decline in the number of Chinese students abroad. China's middle class is an anxious group. Unlike the truly wealthy, the middle class also relies on wages and their assets deriving from income. Their greatest anxiety is ensuring that their children do not end up working for others, but rather rise to the next social stratum. This is why a popular saying the Chinese middle class is, "We cannot let our children lose at the starting line." The majority of the middle class invest their spare money in their children's education, which is why the number of Chinese students studying abroad saw an explosive increase in previous years. Additionally, in China, CCP indoctrination runs throughout a person's life, starting from kindergarten. To avoid their children falling into the same fate, many parents save and sacrifice to send their children out of China. To help their children escape the cage sooner, more and more parents are sending their children to receive Western education early. Despite the high costs, the number of Chinese students in primary and secondary schools in Western developed countries has significantly increased over the years. For middle-class families, financial stability hinges on a steady income flow. As long as salaries rise, the middle class remains confident. However, their biggest fear is unemployment or salary cuts, because without an income, the so-called middle class can quickly become debt-ridden. Over the past decade, more middle-class families have purchased homes, mostly through mortgages. From 2007 to 2016, housing prices in China skyrocketed, increasing several-fold. While the nominal wealth of families appear to grow, due to rising property values, urban household debt also surged due to large mortgage amounts. Within 10 years, over one-third of households became highly indebted, with monthly mortgage payments becoming a fixed expense. However, at the end of 2021, the collapse of the real estate giant Evergrande Group signaled the bursting of the real estate bubble. In just 2 years, the economic situation deteriorated rapidly, with the entire real estate industry in decline and various sectors impacted to different degrees. By this year, widespread layoffs and across-the-board salary reductions have become common, with second-hand housing prices generally falling by 20%. In March, United News reported that China's official data showed a 15.9% year-on-year drop in personal income tax revenue for the first 2 months of this year, reflecting increased salary cuts and unemployment. The public believes that the middle class is becoming more vulnerable, with the middle class falling into poverty becoming a hot topic online. A man working in human resources in Shanghai shared his job-seeking experience with a central news agency reporter. He began job hunting in late February 2023, sending out thousands of resumes to places like Suzhou, Hangzhou, and Shanghai. However, he only received interview invitations from companies in Shanghai and was eventually hired by one company in June of the same year. His previous job was at an AI-related internet company with a monthly salary of 25,000 renminbi, plus commercial insurance. His new job, despite a promotion, only offered 16,000 RMB per month without Social Security. Shortly after starting, this state-owned enterprise cut salaries by 10%. Comparing his job search in September 2020 to February 2023, he found that job postings related to human resources had dropped from over 40 pages to only 14 pages, even after lowering his salary expectations. He noted that being over 35, job hunting even harder in China. This man's experience aligns with China's official data on decreasing personal income tax revenue and stagnant unemployment rates, showing a continuing trend. With unemployment and salary cuts, the middle class is under increasing pressure. Household income is insufficient to cover extensive expenses. and property values are shrinking along with family wealth. Limited financial assets against large mortgages force families to cut back on spending. For families and students studying abroad, the annual cost of tuition and living expenses often amount to hundreds or thousands or even millions of yuan. Additionally, families who originally planned to send their children abroad have had to cancel their plans due to lower than expected incomes or unemployment, contributing to the overall decline of the number of Chinese students studying abroad. The Chinese government is also intentionally reducing the political status of overseas students. In many places, regulations prevent students returning from abroad from entering state-owned enterprises, central enterprises, or public institutions. Media outlets exacerbate this by promoting narratives that studying abroad is not worth the cost compared to domestic education, with phrases like, "Studying abroad is a losing business," and "overseas students are no longer a hot commodity." This has dissuaded many parents who hoped their children would secure good jobs upon returning from studying abroad.
Nowadays, studying abroad is becoming less popular in many first-tier cities. It's cooling down. Recently, I've talked with many friends about this, and the study abroad market hasn't been doing well in the past year. It's declining day by day. In cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, there are too many students who have studied abroad. Their value is diminishing. Parents and the students themselves doubt the worth of the study abroad experience when they spend 3 to 4 million yuan, but return to a job that only pays 5 to 6,000 yuan a month. What used to be considered a prestigious experience is now too common in these cities, making many companies no longer regard overseas returnees as highly. Additionally, with the rise of numerous study abroad agencies making it easier to study abroad, many returnees admit that their degrees are not as valuable, leading to a decline in their treatment. The economic return on studying abroad is far below expectations, so many parents now realize that the moon abroad isn't as bright as they thought.
In a video, a blogger stated, "In 2024, overseas students are prohibited from entering state-owned enterprises. The direction has completely changed. Recently, a company released a recruitment notice explicitly stating that applicants must not have studied abroad. Moreover, applicants with direct relatives who have settled abroad within 2 generations are also not considered." In recent years, rumors about state-owned enterprises and government agencies no longer hiring overseas returnees have sparked widespread discussion online. Recruitment notices in places like Dalian explicitly state that individuals with overseas studies experience are not eligible to apply for positions in state-owned enterprises and government agencies. This policy is not only implemented in Dalian but also in cities like Shanghai. State media boast that Chinese youth are becoming more rational about studying abroad, with more people recognizing that their own country is better, resulting in a yearly decline in the number of students studying abroad. However, the fact is that the number of Chinese people fleeing to the U.S. illegally has surged to all-time highs. A CBS 60 Minutes report highlighted that Chinese migrants were among the fastest-growing groups entering the U.S. illegally from the Mexican border. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported that the number of Chinese citizens illegally entering the U.S. through the southwest border has reached a historic high. Last year, the number of Chinese apprehended at the southwest border soared to 37,000, 50 times the number 2 years ago.